welcome. It's a beautiful spring day here in Southern Ontario. And I'd like to thank you for joining us on our regular series, our Caregiving Essentials Webinar Series. Today, our topic is Working and Family Caregiving, Making the Impossible Possible. My name is Christine Kennedy, and I'll be your host today. And on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and McMaster Continuing Education, I'd like to welcome you. Before I introduce our speakers for today and go through our housekeeping, I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we reside, McMaster University. I'm up in my home in Ancaster, but the whole area on which we reside is recognized as being part of the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So today is a very exciting day. We have Dr. Allison Williams joining us. And hopefully many of you are aware, as advertised in the promotion leading up to this event, that the talk that we are giving today is sort of to promote the new course that Dr. Allison Williams and Donna Thomson created. They co-created this course that McMaster's Continuing Ed is offering for free, creating caregiver-friendly workplaces. So that course is new. It was just released in April, and they're very excited that you are here wanting to learn more about, caregiving and work-life balance, because it's something that many of us are dealing with, and it can be very stressful. So before I introduce Donna and Dr. Williams, we always go through a little bit of the logistics, the housekeeping. So if you have any questions or comments, please type the questions in the little Q&A icon at the bottom, and that the chat function is open and everyone is able to see that. So feel free to post some comments, share your thoughts, share some of your own personal experiences that you think others may want to or could learn from, but just be mindful that the chat is open for everyone. So maybe just don't put too much personal information like your name, where you live, all of that kind of good information. Good information for you, but maybe not good information for everyone to know. Also, we do have a closed captioning feature. So if you would like to activate that, if you sort of go to where the little three buttons are, if you click on that, you'll be able to activate the closed captioning. And a reminder, as always, the webinar is being recorded. So if you need to leave or for whatever reason, because this is lunchtime, but sometimes you can't always attend for the full hour, you will get a recording of this probably in about a week or so. So that was a lot of talking. So now it's my pleasure to introduce, as always, our host, Donna Thomson. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of 2 best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates the free online courses for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials, and just the new course that I mentioned, Creating Caregiving-Friendly Workplaces. And she's also the co-instructor of the Family Engagement and Research course, all of which are offered by McMaster. And now our guest speaker of the hour is Dr. Allison Williams. Allison is a professor here at McMaster, where she is a social and health geographer with research interests in career employees, quality of life, critical policy program evaluation, and therapeutic landscapes. Her research focuses on improving workplace practices for supporting employees with adult care responsibilities. Allison has received various awards for her work, having had 3 5-year research chairs funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. She currently holds a McMaster University Faculty of Science Research Chair and leads a partnership grant made up of more than 50 collaborators, which mobilizes career-friendly workplaces. Allison has supervised more than 30 graduate trainees and has been the principal investigator of over 25 research projects, and serves on a range of national and international committees. She is the mother of 2 beautiful children and cares for her 90-year-old uncle and aging parents, both of whom are in her 80s. So clearly, Allison is well equipped to be talking to us about balancing life, work, and caregiving. Thanks, Allison and Donna, for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. And Allison, welcome. I'm so excited to talk with you today. I mean, you and I have have many conversations about your work, your research, what challenges working caregivers are facing today. And I guess the first thing I'm just so curious about, and I wanted to ask you, is that you are a social and health geographer, according to your bio on the McMaster website. And I was intrigued that your whole professional life is really centered around this work-life balance and the challenges of, as we call them, care employees or employee carers. There are many, names for them that different people use. But what we're talking about are people who are working and who are trying to balance their paid employment with unpaid caregiving at home with family members or with friends. So how did you become interested in this area, Allison?
Yes, thanks very much, Donna. It's great to be here. And thanks for the lovely introduction, Christine. So always a pleasure to talk about this work because it's obviously near and dear to my heart. That's a great question, Donna. And when I think about how this all came about, I can certainly talk about the practicality of how I was introduced to the field. But I think when I look at the real reason for my interest in this area, it's really based upon the training I received at York University in my PhD program. I was supervised by a social feminist geographer named Valerie Preston, who really focused on the importance of women's work in her own research. And that obviously was passed along to me. So I was very cognizant of, the expectations and the socialization that we as women basically live through our lived experience, and how those expectations continue to be felt throughout our life trajectory. So my first academic appointment was at Brock University in an interdisciplinary health studies program. And the expectation with that first position was that we would align ourselves very closely with Niagara Public Health in all sorts of partnership and collaborative research. And so it was literally not within a month of starting at Brock where I received a phone call from Niagara Public Health, and they wanted me to be involved in quite a few of their programs, primarily in an evaluative capacity. Now, this is the mid to late 1990s, and Niagara Public Health at that time was responsible for home care. And so they really wanted an evaluation of their palliative home care program. So I gladly accepted, and through that work, I realized the intensity and the duration of the unpaid care role for these primary family carers. And clearly it's a palliative program that they wanted me to evaluate. So many of these primary caregivers had literally left their work completely in order to devote themselves fully to the unpaid care role. And many of them did it, with gracious hearts, and were very happy to have done so. But in following up with these carers, once their loved one had passed on, they were really at a loss as far as what to do with themselves, not only from the perspective of the home environment, because obviously as a health geographer, I was interested in looking at how the microenvironment of the home had transformed as a result of the provision of palliative care, moving from a home environment as we typically understand it through to hospital in the home. So looking at the medicalization of the home. So certainly recognizing the changes that occurred as a result of that process, as well as the changes that the unpaid carer had to experience. And many of them were at a loss as far as how to get back into the job market. They were at a loss as far as what to do with the room within which their loved one passed away. So there was all sorts of unfinished business that had to be taken care of. And that's when I sort of realized, wow, this is such a critical issue. And at that time, it was, close to 80% of all unpaid carers were women. Obviously, in our last census, it's evened out much better. I think it was 46% of unpaid carers are now men, and that's primarily due to our smaller family sizes. But at that time, it was 80% of women who were doing this unpaid care work. And so when we look at the social determinants of health, we know that employment is a critical determinant of health. And so, the question that was raised in my mind was, so if these women are losing work, they're losing their opportunity to be part of the workforce, to not only gain a salary and a pension, but access to benefits and an employment assistance program. But they're also losing their sense of meaning, their sense of belonging, their social network, because often that's where we get all of these things, is within the workplace. So I thought, wow, we really need to be doing something about this, because this is very unhealthy for women and for unpaid carers more broadly if they're leaving the workforce altogether. So that's when I started looking at this whole issue and began investigating the work that had been done within the social sciences more broadly. And there were a couple of really excellent pioneers working in this space in business schools, primarily in management and HR, framing it within work-life balance issues and work-family balance issues more broadly. And then when I moved to McMaster University in 2004, I was really happy to have received an operating grant to evaluate Canada's compassionate care benefit. And that was really recognized globally as a really innovative program that really put Canada on the map, because it not only provided respite and a paid leave for Canadians who are providing palliative care, but it could be used right across the globe. So it was really, really well received by the global community. And so we evaluated that from a wide range of different perspectives, not only from the unpaid care perspective, but also from the healthcare professional perspective, because of course, healthcare professionals are required to sign the form that specifies that the individual who's being cared for is prognosticated to only live for so many weeks. And then we also looked at it from the perspective of the employer. So when doing that research, what we realized is that there was many limitations to the program. And we hope that the evaluative work we did really allowed the program to expand to what it is today. But we still have so far to go in order to manage how to better balance unpaid care and employment.
Yeah.
Certainly in my own life, from a more personal perspective, I recognize the demands of providing unpaid care work for both my uncle and my parents. I have 2 adult children who are still living at home. And I work full time. So I'm very fortunate in that the university position that I hold allows me a whole lot of flexibility, which we know is a really key and relevant accommodation for care employees. In fact, some of our most current research suggests that flexibility decreases depressive symptoms by 35% for care employees.
Wow, that's incredible. I have so many questions and so many thoughts came up as you were describing the beginning of your experience working in this field. And I love that the roots of your work are really in feminism. And I think that lens helps everyone, and male family caregivers as well, that it because we know that the we know there's fundamental differences between the way women and men approach their family caregiving. And I think that it's great to learn from each other and learn best practice in caring, including those gender differences. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about diving into this idea of flexibility. When you began to look at the workplace and how flexibility in working arrangements can benefit the mental and the physical health. But I think you also discovered that it's a good business practice as well, didn't you? And can you talk a little bit about the types of challenges that family caregivers or unpaid family caregivers have trying to balance work and care, and what some of the strategies, including flexibility, really look like? What do we mean when we say flexible work arrangements?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously as a geographer, I think about space and time a lot. So, when we think about, for example, a triangle, we have, work being in one of those spaces. We have the caregiving role for care employees being another one of those corners. And then, the domestic space, which, for example, if we're caring for young dependents. So we have these three places that we basically use most of our, our waking hours in. And sometimes obviously the unpaid care role can take place within that same domestic sphere in which we're living. And certainly we see that a lot with racialized minorities, with new Canadians, where multi-generational households are quite common. And we've done some really interesting work with self-employed new Canadian immigrants who are also care employees. And what we've learned is within that microenvironment of the home, they're able to work and provide that unpaid care simultaneously. And that's part and parcel of the reason why they do that work at home as self-employed employees. But coming back to your question around the biggest challenge facing care employees in Canada today, it's really primarily to be recognized, right? It's unfortunately quite an invisible lived experience being a care employee, because most of the unpaid care work is done in the privacy of one's home, or in the privacy of the care dependent's home, or in, sometimes in long-term care, which is, still recognized as, a private environment. And certainly in the workplace, we're not really recognized either, right? Because it usually takes place outside of our paid employment and our paid workplace. So the biggest challenge is really to be seen, right? Because it's invisible work. It's not necessarily seen by coworkers or supervisors, managers, or anyone else within the workplace. But it's critically important to equity, diversity, and inclusion, or sometimes it's called DEI. It's also critically important to psychological health and well-being, and overall work-life balance. So one of the really critical challenges that we have to address, and this has been represented in 3 of our scoping reviews, these are international scoping reviews of the literature, is the importance of changing the culture of the workplace to be care inclusive. So changing that culture within the workplace to recognize that care employees exist. In fact, we know that 1 in 4 Canadians are care employees. We also know that care employees represent 35% of workforce participants. So any particular workplace has 1/3 of their employee pool who are also balancing unpaid care work. Now, when we do our training to managers, supervisors, HR professionals, they're all sort of, alerted with that fact that 1/3 of their workforce are providing unpaid care work. But that really speaks to the importance of that culture change. We all need to get on the same bandwagon and recognize that this is real, and it will only increase due to our aging population.
Yeah.
We're
I
not only
guess you
living
could
longer,
ask.
but we're living with many more
Sorry.
multiple comorbidities. So the importance of that unpaid care role is increasing in importance.
Yeah, you could ask those employers, what would happen if 35% of your workforce left tomorrow because they were unsupported at work? I mean, flipping that to help employers understand what the value of actually supporting people so that they can remain at work. And I wonder, Allison, you were very instrumental. You were the key person in developing a national standard in Canada for creating care inclusive workplaces. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the standard, some of the range of strategies that make it possible for people to be able not to quit, to be able to stay at work. And also importantly, I think we sometimes forget that people want to care for their loved ones. It's not like they, they would rather not have to worry about caregiving. I mean, I think if somebody we love is sick, we want to be in two places at once is the problem. We have to go to work, but we really want to be at the bedside of someone we love if they're not doing well. So it's the right to care and it's the right to work. And putting these two things together is becoming ever more urgent in our society. And now we have a national standard. And what is the standard and why should we care about it?
Yes, thanks very much. And, I certainly agree with you. And I agree with the comments that have been posted to date around the importance of flex work and working from home. Certainly, we know that flexible work schedules is, recognized as truly beneficial. When we talk about flex work, it's really about, putting the hours in that you've been paid for each week, whether it be 35, 40, 42, whatever the case may be. It also means potentially starting work earlier and leaving work late. It also, potentially means working from home. There's all sorts of other accommodations that are similarly proposed within the standard, which for those of you who may not know was unveiled in 2017 together with an implementation guide. They're both available free of charge on the Canadian Standards Association website. And it's called the Care Inclusive and Accommodating Workplace Standard. And certainly we can share a link to that standard and the free download for the package, which is again, both the standard and the guide. And what the standard does is it really provides a set of guidelines to, first of all, build the foundation for a program that is again, tailored to a particular workplace, whether that be, a workplace that's in a particular sector, such as, primary extraction or education, then to put the program specifically into practice, and then to evaluate that program in order to monitor its progress and its impact, while also continuing to improve the accessibility, availability, functionality, and efficiency of that program. So the biggest challenge is the first step, which is building the foundation. And that's, really recognizing that it's both a bottom-up process, but it also recognizes the importance of top-down resources, top-down support, and top-down guidance and direction. So, the idea of building the foundation is really speaking to that issue around culture change, having people recognize that it needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen, there's going to be people literally moving out of the workforce. And we know that often if care employees are not supported, they decrease their work hours. And they often do leave employment. In fact, close to 10% do leave their paid work. We also know that quite a few of them experience a number of negative health outcomes. So, Our last census data suggested that that both psychosocial, so both negative mental health and physical health outcomes were experienced. And we know that 70% of employer disability claim costs are related to mental health. So again, close to 20% experienced either physical or mental health. We had 15% reducing work hours, 10% turning down promotions, because again, they were unsure of their ability to balance. They had close to 30% taking a leave of absence. And we know that, again, care employees are often in their peak earning years, generally being between the ages of 40 and 65. So they're often the most experienced and the most well-trained workforce. So they're clearly not a workforce that you want to lose. So again, retaining them within the workplace is such a critical, critical and important business case to make, because you're not only retaining them, but you're also improving recruitment strategies for the future, because people are going to be talking well about the workplace. It also increases productivity and loyalty when a workplace is carer inclusive and, again, carer positive. It also improves work-life balance, obviously. So workers are coming to work healthier, not only mentally, but physically healthier. So you're having reduced depression, reduced impacts on psychosocial health, and improved self-reported health. Our intervention research, for example, speaks to the importance of carer-friendly workplaces, decreasing work interferences, such as days off, and again, decreasing numbers of work hours. We also know that it increases job security, it increases schedule control. It also increases supervisor and coworker support when the workplace, again, is carer inclusive. Our research also suggests that it decreases family-work conflict and decreases work-family conflict. So again, the whole argument for work-life balance is critically improved as a result of a change to a carer-inclusive or a carer-friendly workplace. So the standard is really like a recipe for making that happen, irrespective of the sector, irrespective of the size, irrespective of the demographic profile. So we know that, for example, construction, transportation, and extraction resource industries are primarily male dominated. But given that, again, 46% of carer employees and unpaid carers are male these days, we really need to make a concerted effort to speak to these particular male-dominated workplaces. We completed a study on male carer employees about 5 years ago, and what we found is that many male carer employees are very reticent about divulging their unpaid care role because of fear of stigma. So because, again, our society doesn't really recognize or support the idea of men providing care, male care employees often keep that to themselves and consequently don't reach out for the help they need, nor do they speak to their co-workers, their managers, their supervisors about being properly accommodated, and consequently experience all of those negative work and health outcomes that I referred to earlier.
Allison, I wonder, thinking about the standard and putting that together with the very exciting announcement that came out with the latest budget of the federal government. Part of the budget was the announcement of a new national caregiver strategy. And how do you think the standard or carer-friendly workplaces and their creation and their support could fit into a national strategy for family caregivers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And how exciting is that, Donna?
I know.
The strategy. Wow.
Yeah.
Sort of like, I'm so glad that it actually happened before before the end of my career anyway. But I certainly recognize that the standard as it currently stands is voluntary. So employers can choose only voluntarily to implement the standard. But if we were to move this care inclusive and accommodating workplace standard from a voluntary standard to a required standard, if it was a requirement for all workplaces, then I think we would really get the traction we need in order to, again, change the culture within the workplace to ensure that care employees are properly accommodated and to, again, see the needle move around carer-friendly workplaces and care-inclusive culture more broadly. So moving it to a requirement would really, I think, having it as similar to, for example, maternity, paternity leave, having it, as equal to emergency family days, to bereavement leaves, to having it, at the same level of importance and expectation across the workplace, both employees, supervisors, managers, HR professionals, the C-suite, having everybody on the same page around how to best accommodate care employees through, again, making the standard a requirement. That would be ideal.
Yeah, that would be truly amazing. And I think it would put Canada on the map as far as how to, a big, huge positive action that the federal government could take in supporting the well-being of our society, which we know the demographics of aging are going to make caring for people in families very challenging. And we also, of course, have a shrinking workforce in terms of the aging demographics. So it's going to be urgent, I think. We've had a lot of questions that have come in from both in the chat and as people registered, they were able to ask questions as well. And I want to combine two of the questions that we received. One of the questions was, how do you know if it's time to quit your job? And someone in the chat also said, flexibility and some of the strategies to accommodate people in the workplace that you've discussed, Allison, are fine if the period of caring is time limited. But for parents of children with disabilities, this is a lifelong commitment to giving care. So I wondered about, do you ever foresee a time and a culture of a carer-friendly workplace culture that could accommodate a lifetime of caring? And I ask this as someone who is a parent of an adult son who has severe multiple disabilities. And I was absolutely not able to be in the workplace for almost all of my adult life. I started working at about age 55 when he received 24-hour one-to-one care. So, you can't be in two places at once, quite literally. And I'm sitting here wondering, could there ever be a workplace that I could have done both? I think probably not in my case, because there were so many hospitalizations and everything and always an emergency. However, in the case of lifelong caring, can you imagine what a carer inclusive workplace would look like that could support somebody in that role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think that's the challenge, right? Is because, we really haven't created our workplaces to be family friendly more broadly, right? Like our family life is recognized as separate from our work life. And I think, what we've done at McMaster University in our research program is partner with some, real movers and shakers like the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, Carers Canada, Canadian Home Care Association, Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association, And what we've learned from those partnerships is that we really need to reconcile our unpaid care with our paid employment. They need to be they need to be no longer separate entities, but they need to be really combined and complemented. So that really means restructuring our work and also restructuring our welfare system and the welfare state more broadly. And as you know, Donna, our welfare state has really been hit hard over the last 3 decades. And, we've only started to realize the extent to which it has been impacted as a result of the pandemic. But we really need to rebuild our welfare state. And if we're able to better build our welfare state, I think we'll be in a much better position to take care of, for example, children who have disabilities and also adults who have disabilities. We've just seen, again, our welfare state really fall to pieces, and the expectation was that our volunteer sector would pick up the pieces. But clearly, everyone is working with very limited resources right across the board. But in answering your question about, or one of the questions in the chat about, how does one actually come to terms with recognizing that maybe it's time to rethink whether or not they're best balancing their paid work and their unpaid care work, is to really ideally recognize burnout in yourself, which is sometimes really challenging because we're so busy and we're often very goal focused with, trying to get through our to-do list every day. But some of the adverse effects of, being a carer employee is you do get burned out, and there's multiple signs of burnout, and they vary by individual. But some of them include lack of energy and motivation, cynicism and pessimism, feelings of isolation, often irritability. Sometimes you also feel some physiological changes, such as changes in your appetite or sleep quality. And you also feel like you're procrastinating a lot. You're losing any sense of satisfaction from activities that were previously enjoyable. You're not taking any initiative in self-care, disengaging from work, family, or personal responsibilities. And some of our research, unfortunately, speaks to some of the more negative coping mechanisms being much more attractive when individual care employees are burnt out, such as substance abuse. Mm-hmm. So again, burnout is often a comorbid condition with many other mental health problems. And I've noted the stats around depression. So again, if family, friends, or even your family doctor recognizes that you have anxiety or depression or have some of the symptoms of burnout, that might be your first sign. Asking friends and family if, again, they see any symptoms. People who you trust, asking them the same, that may be your first sign that things have got to change around how you're better how you are currently managing your employment and your unpaid care work. And it may mean having a family meeting. It may mean recognizing that, as the primary carer, you need to be thinking about how to better involve other members of the family or of the network in order to ensure that there is a more fair distribution of domestic management and care responsibilities more broadly. Mm-hmm. Not for conversations, but obviously, if you're feeling burnt out or showing some of these symptoms, it's time to put in place such a critical conversation in order to save yourself from further negative health outcomes.
Yeah, it's tricky though, because, I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go to a meeting of women leaders. I'm not even sure why I was invited because I'm not a leader, but I was invited. And there were some very powerful women political leaders and business leaders there. Every one of them felt guilty when they were at work because they thought they should be home. And when they were home, they felt guilty because they thought they should be at work. And, I know this isn't an example of caregiving exactly, but I think there's a point here that one of the women said she had a 2-year-old, healthy 2-year-old, and her husband was the primary caregiver for their child. And that when her little boy fell and scraped his knee, the child went running to the father. And when she told that story, everybody in the room went, oh, like that. And I think what that tells us is that we feel that there is no upper limit to the amount of care that we should be able to give if we have enough love and loyalty to the people that we love most in life. And I think I hope one of the good things about the courses that are on offer here at McMaster, including the new course for care-friendly workplaces, is to understand what our limitations are when we are doing our best in both of these roles. These necessary roles. Somebody has to make a living to pay the bills, and somebody has to give care at home to people in the family. And how are these responsibilities going to be divided? But I think we have to also look at human capacities, because part of the reason I think that we do get burnt out is primarily because we don't have enough support in communities, but B, because we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves based on love and loyalty. And maybe part of the conversation we could have nationally about adopting the standard and more widely care-friendly workplaces is to say, okay, what does it mean to be a carer employee? And are there any there are upper limits to the number of hours that we are expected to work at work, but there are no upper limits to what we're expected to do informally, unpaid at home. So how can we get our heads around the expectations that we have for ourselves personally in order to better approach what help may be available, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And, when you find the answer to that, Donna, would you mind sharing it with me?
But maybe some people here have some ideas, and if you do, put them in the chat, because I do think we need, I think part of what we talk about in the new course through videos and through storytelling is to say to your HR manager or to a colleague or to someone who is in a position to help you, it's hard to balance what I'm doing, and I'm worried that I'm going to let my colleagues down. I'm going to let my mother down. I'm going to fail at all of these massive efforts I'm making because I feel like I'm not doing well.
Yeah, I think, more seriously, it really comes back to, I think 2 things. And the first is, when we look at the social determinants of health, so, currently there's 13 that are listed on Health Canada's website. And, there's the importance of work, as I mentioned earlier. There's also the importance of coping and resiliency. And so coping and resiliency is a really critical component of how we basically live our lives. And coping and resiliency, I think, takes some responsibility for not only ourselves, but also in recognizing the importance of a social network. And we know that social cohesion and support more broadly is really critical to our overall health and well-being. So, again, if it's not your EAP, if it's not, available for your benefit
EAP
package, employment assistance program, again, one of our first intervention studies in creating care-friendly workplaces with the standard as an intervention, one of the findings was that nobody knew about the supports available to employees to better balance their paid work and their unpaid care responsibilities. And so, one of the first steps is to see A, what's available to you, and then B, to basically do your very best to navigate and advocate for being sure that you get those supports. And that may mean having a hard conversation with your supervisor or manager or your coworkers. But again, it's all about self-preservation when we're trying to do our very best to balance these two roles. We also know that our Canadian standard was scaled up to the international level and published in 2022. We have an international standard also available. Unfortunately, it's not for purchase, but it does note the importance of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goal number 5, which is gender equality, and specifically target 5.4, which is equal division of domestic and care work. So coming back to your point, Donna, about where's the limit to how much we should be giving or how much we can manage to give, a lot of it is about recognizing that we do need to really work towards a more equal division of labor when it comes to unpaid care work and domestic management more broadly, not only in Canada, but across the world more broadly. And we know that in the work that we've done, for example, with a wide range of different racial minority groups or visible minority groups here in Canada, is that, many new immigrant Canadians are very much following the cultural norms of their home country. And we know that the vast majority of immigrants come from countries that broadly represent the global South, where the division of labor is much more unequal. So when they come to Canada, they usually continue providing, primarily, care work, unpaid care work, following those cultural norms from their home country, which are primarily patriarchal. So, women are generally expected to provide unpaid care, not only for young dependents, but all family members across the life course. So that really puts them in a much more risky position when they're trying to balance their unpaid care work and their paid employment, because the familial expectation across generations is still that is primarily women's work. So, something to be really cognizant of and thinking about EDI, right? Equity, diversity, and inclusion. We also know that 2S LGBTQ+ groups are similarly quite vulnerable with respect to their unpaid care role, because often they unfortunately lose their biological kin. So all the unpaid care that's provided within many of those populations are provided by non-biological kin. So friends, families, friends and acquaintances, partners and spouses. So as a consequence, the care is very different and the expectations for care are very different. So, again, we still have so much to learn about the care employee experience, but we are making small steps in better understanding, again, how we can best support these care employees through building resilience, building coping mechanisms, building supports, even if just a care-friendly or a care support group at work where individuals meet once a week for lunch, or if, again, a leader is able to bring in a resource person from the Community Care Access Center or from a local care agency to provide a guest lecture over lunch. We call them lunch and learns, to speak about, again, what are the available services? Because again, many of these new Canadians are very unaware of how our health and our social service programs work. And many care employees are thrust into this caregiving role, having no idea where to turn. And being able to, again, learn about the social and health services that are available, not only at work, but also in their communities, would be really, really beneficial. As far as, again, building those coping and resilience skills for managing this going forward.
And there's a lot of training opportunities and resources and tools for lunch and learns and tips on how to build face-to-face support groups in workplaces that are embedded. All of those things are embedded in the new course. So if anyone listening is a caregiver struggling to balance life and work, the course is also useful, very useful for care employees to take, and then present some of these ideas back to their HR directors at work. I wonder, we've had, as I say, a lot of questions from people when they registered. And one of the questions that was quite common, we had quite a few people asking, was how to approach. Allison, how do you recommend that people approach the fear of self-declaring at work, a family caregiver role that could be seen to be in competition with excellence and loyalty and everything in the workplace? There's a lot of, I think some people have good reason to be fearful, especially if it's a very, I don't know how to describe it. I think you used the word patriarchal. I mean, certainly my husband, in his job over the years, one of his colleagues died of a heart attack, and my husband overheard somebody say in the cafeteria, well, I guess he just wasn't the right stuff because he died of a heart attack. So there are these places that look at vulnerability of human challenges that are outside of the workforce as I guess in competition with this idea that while you're at work, you should only be thinking about work, you should only be doing work, you should be striving for excellence. How can people not be fearful? What is the antidote of an individual person who needs to approach an individual HR manager? What advice do you have?
Yeah, that's another tricky question. And certainly in our first intervention study, we had care employees basically take part in training to be able to actually build the skills that they needed to approach their manager and their supervisor to ask for the accommodations that were rightly theirs. And a lot of it has to do with, what you came back to, what you mentioned earlier around, not only fear, but also self-worth, right? As far as recognizing that we all have limitations. And so, I think part of the coping and resiliency is about recognizing that, we're not going to be able to do this and stay healthy. So we're going to absolutely need to reach out. And, certainly the online course, Creating Care-Friendly Workplaces, you've spoken to it a couple of times. It's a 10-hour commitment to learn how to do this. And it's not only for human resource professionals, but also occupational health and safety professionals, supervisors, managers, as well as care employees themselves. Anyone interested in work-life balance and EDI, more broadly, psychological health and wellness, are welcome to take this free online course. It's going to be free for the next 5 years. And it also provides a micro-credential for those professionals who need that continuing professional development. And, you know, what we really suggest is that one self-advocates in having those discussions. And if you're fearful, because we know that, you know, it is still very much stigmatized in the workplace, most workplaces, frankly, it's still very much stigmatized. Then we need to get a buddy. We need to get someone on side to join us in having that conversation. And sometimes it's as gentle as presenting the accommodations that are available through the benefits or the employment assistance program at the workplace and requesting what works best for you as a carer employee. And to, again, recognize that you will actively play a role in ensuring that the work gets done through, for example, discussing with coworkers, making sure that hours are completed at week's end, ensuring that resources are provided to, for example, temporary staff that may be coming in to assist in accommodating you. So again, playing an active role, being positive, being proactive, being brave. And if that means taking a buddy along with you or taking someone who's already on board, such as someone from Workplace Wellness. Everyone has a workplace wellness group. Everyone has an occupational health and safety representative. You may even need to get, for example, your association or your union involved to ensure that you get what you need to ensure that you stay at work. Because I think it's really important that we continue to stay at work. As much as as easy as it is to think about us leaving work in order to be sure that we get our unpaid care responsibilities done to the best of our ability, work often, again, we've learned this through reams and reams of research with care employees, work actually provides a respite.
It does.
And it provides a place outside of the unpaid care role where you keep your identity, you keep your sense of belonging, you keep your sense of meaning, you keep your sense of meaning with respect to what you're contributing to society more broadly. And it's really important for your well-being. I've been speaking about the social determinants of health, and we know that work is one of them, as is being a part of something greater than yourself. That again, social network, that coping and resilience piece. Mm-hmm. So being at work is actually really good for our health and really good for our quality of life and our well-being. So, you know, being able to best manage how you can stay at work while also best ensuring that your unpaid care responsibilities are being met to the to satisfaction is really important. That's really the ploy and the argument that you're making when you do approach your supervisor and your manager. We have an excellent management training program on our website under tools and resources. Our website is ghw.mcmaster.ca. And there's a tools and curriculum tab. And under that tools and curriculum tab is a PowerPoint presentation for supervisors and managers. These are all downloadable tools. I think there's close to 30 different tools on that site. Many of them are incorporated into the McMaster Continuing Ed course, Building Carer-Friendly Workplaces. But sharing that slide deck with your supervisor, manager, HR person before the meeting might be another good strategy. Educate them about who you are and what you're experiencing. Because a lot of what we've learned from our various research projects and specifically our intervention projects is that managers, supervisors, human resource professionals don't have a clue because this is all invisible.
Yeah.
Unless we bring it forward and start educating everybody within our workplaces, then, no one's going to learn. So, we really do have to play that advocacy role and really be that health promoter, that public health professional in ensuring that everyone is cognizant of what you're experiencing. Again,
Absolutely.
1 in 4 Canadians, 1/3 of the labor force is doing this work. And
there are a lot of us, and there are a lot of us here today, and so many more who registered but couldn't be here today will also receive the link to the YouTube recording of our conversation today, Allison, and we can all be advocates on this issue. I think it's also a voting issue. And there is a big initiative at the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence on supporting working carers as well. So there are many, many ways to get involved. And I know that our time has come to an end. Actually, we're over by a little bit. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Allison Williams, for joining us today and having this really important conversation. It's creating care-friendly workplaces is not only good for people, it's good for society and our country as well. I just want to thank you so much for your research and for being here and telling us about it today.
Thank you very much, Donna. It's been really fun chatting with everyone, and always happy to do this. It's so central to our life and our society more broadly, as you very eloquently said. And we have to be the change.
We do. And together we can. And I feel like we ended on a really hopeful note. We can't do it alone. We have to do it together. And we can create a movement around this. So I think we are doing that. And thank you, Allison. And over to you, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna and Allison. Yes, you know, is it Gandhi who said, I think I'm paraphrasing, be the change you want to see? It wasn't he the individual that said that? So yes, if together, right, as a collective, we will have more influence versus people individually. Oh, I wanted this, I wanted this. So yes, if there's sort of like this movement, then we will see the change. We will see the change we want. Well, thank you so much to both of you and everyone for sharing, you know, many of your trials and tribulations. Very tough, right? It's very tough as we try to balance our work commitments with our family commitments. And next month, Donna, sort of leading, this is a good segue to next month's talk. We're going to be talking about care mapping. So as we figure out like, okay, I have all of these, you know, and the triangle that Allison was talking about in my domestic, I have all of these responsibilities. Well, who can also help me with the care mapping? Figuring out, okay, is it a cousin? Is it a neighbor? So it's a way to sort of alleviate that stress that you feel, or that the person you're caregiving for feels. Yeah, so that is what we're going to be talking about on June the 5th. Donna will be joined by Stephanie and Raj. Raj is the sort of proprietor of a company called Atlas Care Map. And he's going to be talking about, yeah, what care mapping is. And Stephanie will be joining. She's a social worker in Toronto, and she'll be joining us and talking about how she uses it sort of in her practice with her patients. So it will be very good. As mentioned, this was recorded, so you will get a link with the recording, and please feel free to share this with as many people as you can, because as we mentioned, there's strength in numbers. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again. When you leave the Zoom webinar, there will be a little survey that comes up, and we would appreciate if you would take the 30 seconds or 45 seconds to fill that out. That would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Enjoy your afternoon.